Greetings. My name is Andre Ward, and I'm the Associate Vice President of Policy at the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy at the Fortune Society. Welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion driven show that examines the legal system from various perspectives, including people most impacted by the criminal legal system. We discuss critical questions about how the current system works, its intersections with social justice, and we highlight the efforts of all of those that are involved. And we ask you, the viewers, to spread the word about both sides of the bars and share your comments with us on Twitter at the Fortune Society SOC. Today's show is very, very significant and important as we bring together some really important leaders in the criminal legal system reform reentry space. And today's show is entitled The State of Criminal Justice Services and Reform. Where do we go from here? You know, in recent years, there have been some successes in the movement to reshape justice. The passing of legislation like bail reform, raising the age of criminal responsibility, discovery reform, and New York City's policy position to close Rikers Island in New York City by 2027. And there have also been a number of investments in services to help to stabilize the lives of justice system involved men and women, such as reentry housing, and increased dollars towards alternatives to incarceration and reentry services. But at the same time, there's also been movement to roll back some of these advances, like the constant attack on bail reform as the cause of crime spikes in New York. The NIMBY attitude, like not in my backyard attitude from certain communities, rejecting transitional, affordable and supportive housing for people in reentry, and delays in the plans to close Rikers Island in New York City, which have fueled some to question the viability of the plan to close it altogether. Our guests today are three reentry nonprofit leaders based in New York City, and they'll discuss the challenges of confronting efforts to roll back reforms and the need to shift narratives to show that these reforms advance racial justice, as well as stronger and safer communities. Our leaders who will join us today are none other than Stanley Richards, the Deputy CEO of the Fortune Society, Archana Jayaram, who is the President and CEO of the Osborne Association, and Jonathan McLean, CEO of CASES, the Center for Alternative Sentencing and Employment Services. Stanley, Archana, Jonathan, welcome to Both Sides of the Bars. How are each of you doing today? And Archana, apologies for mispronouncing your last name. What's the correct pronunciation of your last name? Apologies for that.
That's okay. It's Jairam.
Jairam. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I want to really get right into this because each of you are leaders in the criminal legal system reform space relative to reentry work and advocacy work as well. And knowing that all of you are deeply committed to this work, we felt it was important to have you all come to both sides of the bars to inform our viewers of the work you're doing and some of your perspective and analyses on what's happening in the reentry and the advocacy criminal legal system reform space. And I'll start with you, Stan, right? You know, you've been doing this work for some time. You work at the Fortune Society. Talk a little bit briefly about like what is Fortune and what does it mean to you when you hear the statement, the state of criminal justice services and reform?
Well, Fortune Society is a 55-year-old organization that's dedicated to providing reentry and alternatives to incarceration. We firmly believe that by changing policies, working to provide off-ramps for people who are impacted by the criminal legal system, and welcoming people home and engaging them in services is a recipe for stronger communities, safer communities, and stronger and thriving families. And so our work is surrounded around that: housing, employment, education, alternatives to incarceration, licensed mental health and substance abuse treatment. But when I hear the question, what is the status of reentry and criminal justice? For me, it is a process that we could never forget that it was a time in New York City where we had 100,000 people going through our criminal justice system each year. We had over 20,000 people incarcerated on Rikers Island and had over 72,000 people in our New York State prisons. And so this is a fight, this is a battle to, one, humanize those who are impacted by the system, and then imploring our government partners to make the right investments to bring about the change in this system that we know devastates so many people. So it's an ongoing fight, it's an evolution, and we can never rest on what we've accomplished because we have to continue to fight on.
Absolutely, Stan. And I want to turn to you, Archana, right? Again, you're leading as the president and CEO of the Osborne Association, right? Talking about the importance of programs, right? We know there's been some recent news that have happened in New York City relative to service providers, being no longer being able to provide services in docks, right? Which is New York City Rikers Island Jail. So, we've heard the news about the $17 million cut by New York City's Department of Correction to eliminate contracts with programs in jails. Why are jail services, Archana, so vital?
Yeah, thank you, Andre, for that question. So I was associate commissioner at the Department of Correction about 10 years ago. I created the predecessor to the current program that is about to be cut on June 30th. At the time, I fought for every dollar we had on Rikers to be able to spend on programming. It is critical to the state of the facility, to keeping tensions under control, reducing idleness. That type of programming is critical. People need to be busy. People need something to do. And sitting in the day room and watching TV and not being challenged intellectually or emotionally is not a good place for people to be in. So it is really important to provide programming, for just the day-to-day functioning of the facility, for the safety of everyone in that facility, for the correction officers. But in addition, building relationships with nonprofit providers who often employ credible messengers and people with backgrounds of incarceration is an incredibly powerful tool to build connections back to the community, to give people hope, to give incarcerated people the tools they need to, when they inevitably return home, to have a place to go, to find a job, to find housing, to have the basic needs that they have met so that they're able to succeed in their reentry. One big challenge with coming home from an incarcerated setting is you've been through trauma, you've lost a lot of trust with all kinds of institutions. Who are you going to turn to? What office building are you going to walk into? And when you know an organization like Osborne or Fortune or Cases, and you know the reputation of those organizations, you know the reputation of their staff, you're more likely to walk in the door and take that risk of saying, hi, I need help. And that is the thing that helps you when you have that moment of potential risk to get involved in the legal system again. And that's what we all are looking to avoid. We want public safety. We want people who have been incarcerated to come home and succeed.
Totally. And Archana, just briefly for our viewers, what does Osborne do?
Oh,
right?
Yeah, thank you.
And then we'll transition right to Jonathan, because I think it's really germane to this conversation, and it's also appropriate, right? Because of the work that Cases does follows kind of what you're talking about now. But what does Osborne do briefly?
Yeah, thank you. I would say that we look at it like help people avoid incarceration, diversion, alternatives to incarceration, other options that keep you from ever walking in the door of an incarcerated situation. When you are incarcerated, having programs, services that improve the conditions of your confinement, and then really to ensure that you have a successful reentry. And, as I mentioned, that means housing, that means jobs, that also means substance use programming, that means cognitive behavioral therapy, that means case management, and really just ensuring that we see the whole person and that we say, what are your needs? How can we help you? What can we connect you to? And that's really where our skill set is. And that's why people trust us. We are a 90-year-old organization that has been providing holistic services to incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people that whole time.
Yeah, and turning to you, Jonathan, right, as the president and CEO of Cases, the work that Cases does is obviously important, right, consistent with the work of Fortune and Osborne. And so what does Cases do, and how does Cases serve people with criminal legal system involvement?
Thank you, Andre. And first, let me just tell you how thrilled I am to share this platform with Stanley and Archana, two of my most favorite people in the field, my colleagues, and they've been great supports to me. To answer that question, I mean, not unlike Fortune and Osborne, we provide many of the same services, but I like to paint the picture of what our vision is. And our vision is to create a city where a person's criminal legal system involvement and behavioral health needs doesn't limit their opportunity to actually realize their very best life. And I think that in sum and substance is what we all try to do. We provide a number of services in different buckets. So we have ATI, alternative to incarceration services. We have a number of enrichment programs for young people and people who are on the cusp of getting caught up in the system, mentoring, tutoring, GED. We have a large court-based component where we provide services for those who are before adjudication and those who are after adjudicated, who are in the midst of dealing with the outcome of their cases. And we have this extensive behavioral health continuum that really cuts to the core of providing services for people who more likely than not should not be in jail and should have received services prior to their involvement in the system.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Johnson. I want to turn to you now, Stanley. And can you describe, for us, right, like the progress jurisdictions made regarding the reduction of mass incarceration? I know you've been involved in paying close attention to it. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, we've made some progress in New York City. I mean, going from 22,000 people down to, at the low point, 3,400. Unfortunately, we're seeing that go back up to 6,000. We're a city of over 8 million people, and to have a footprint that went from 22,000 down to 3,400 is a real testament to the partnerships that we've seen over the decades to get us to this particular place. And what's revealing in that process is that we didn't compromise community safety. At one point, when we got down to 3,400, New York was considered one of the safest, biggest cities in this country. And so we have seen where we could reduce our footprint on mass incarceration, leverage the partnerships and resources we need to help people either divert from incarceration or return home from incarceration, and provide the kind of supports that allow people to thrive in their communities. And so we've seen it. We've seen the number of people who are detained on parole with the introduction of less is more. We've seen the closing of 12 prisons in New York State, where the governor is using those prisons as an opportunity to repurpose those facilities to bring about economic opportunities for those communities so they don't have to rely on mass incarceration to have a job and to have economic stability in their communities. And so we've seen some lessons of success. The question and challenge for us is, do we have the political will and the steadfastness to allow the kind of rhetoric that you hear around crime increasing and the bail reform is the problem, and really find the center place where we can create a system that is truly, truly fair, accountable, and just. And people who are impacted by this system have a way of exiting that system. And that's the work that we find ourselves in this moment.
No, absolutely, Stan. And turning to you, Archana, right? You've been doing this work for a significant period of time and have experience relative to understanding the space. Yet, as a new CEO, like, what do you see, right, as the challenge and opportunities in the criminal justice space?
Yeah, thank you. I think so. I've been at Osborne for a little over a year. It's an incredible organization. What I've observed at Osborne is that this is an organization where everybody who works here is dedicated to the mission in a way that I've never experienced in any other organization. And that's not a knock on any other organization, but I think it is something that people feel very deeply when people have had their personal experience with the criminal legal system, when their loved ones have had experiences with the criminal legal system. They know that it's not right, and they know that it needs to change, and they dedicate their lives to reforming these systems. So it really is a very powerful personal mission of the individuals who work at Osborne. The other thing that's really struck me is that this is this incredible community of people who feel this work very deeply, and in partnership with Stanley and Jonathan and with many other partners, we've all been sort of killing ourselves to try to get this cut restored. And it just has really shown the strong community that we have, the strong commitment to closing Rikers. We really have very fertile ground for reform in this state and in this city. And we just have to kind of continue to build on those relationships and build on the successes that Stanley is mentioning around reductions in the state and city incarcerated population. The fact that mass incarceration is a term that we all understand and that we use now is a huge amount of progress from where we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We know that incarceration harms people. We know that it doesn't make people better. So what are the solutions that make us better? And New York City can and should be the place where we're having those conversations. We should be the city on the hill. I'm stealing from Stanley now. I heard him say that the other day. And I am just really grateful for the partnerships and the foundation of work that's already been done. And I think we just have a lot more to do in sort of challenging political and economic climates to really ensure that everyone is focused on this human rights crisis.
And you mentioned, Archana, closing Rikers, and I want to turn to you, Jonathan, right, as it relates to that, right? Like, what are the alternatives to incarceration that we need to scale to actually, in fact, close Rikers?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, but I think I want to kind of frame a little bit the challenges, right? I mean, let's we all are in the business of combating poverty. We need to identify the need when you look at the kind of programs that we need to scale. And if you think about Rikers Island, the reality is we all, as program providers or service providers, serve predominantly Black and Brown people. 9 out of 10 people on Rikers are Black and Latino. Half the population are living with a mental illness, and 1 in 5 have a serious mental illness. So there are a number of people on Rikers Island who could benefit from services in the community, and ostensibly probably should not have been on Rikers Island, but not for the way the system is set up. So we've got a serious problem in terms of addressing the needs of those who are in the system and those who need services before they get to the system. The programs that we need to scale up are the programs that really support people around the areas that they need services in. The behavioral health programs that many of us run have done wonders to reduce the numbers and get people who don't live in vacuums, by the way, connected to the services that they need in the community. So there needs to be a concerted effort to address people's needs in the community before they get into the system, because we know what happens to people when they get to Rikers Island. The other thing is we need to do the work that needs to be done upstream. I steal that term from the mayor, even though he's all over the place sometimes. But it's true. The work in the community where we're working with folks to address their needs before they get caught up in the system. I mean, I'm going to just keep it real. I mean, as a Black man from the city who has lived in an over-policed and underserved community, I know what it's like to grow up in an environment where you're not getting your needs met, and then you are pigeonholed and put into a box where the margin for error for you is none. So, I think we're all providing the kind of services that not only address the needs of those who are coming out, those who are going in, but those in the community before they get caught up in the system. So we're going to focus in terms of scaling programs. Like one of the programs I'll tell you that we love on our end is our ACEs program. Our assertive community engagement and success program, where we really work with young people predisposition and pre-involvement in the criminal legal system to get them the supports that they need so that they don't get caught up and they don't end up in that vicious cycle that Archana and Stan have talked about. We need to give young people alternatives, and those are the kind of programs that we need to scale, in addition to the ATI programs that keep people out of jail, which cost a lot less than incarcerating people, to begin to address the issues.
Sure. And Stanley, as Jonathan has kind of articulated those things, right? What actually threatens the continued reduction of mass incarceration and policy changes, right, that increase community safety and community integration?
I think the lack of investment is one. And I think we really need to put that front and center. Archana talked about the $17 million that is being cut from DOC as a result of the mayor's 4% peg for all the city agencies to cut back. We're talking about $17 million from a $1.2 billion Department of Correction budget. And we're making choices about what we cut and what we invest in. And as President Biden says, our budget is a values document. The things we value are the things that we invest in. And clearly, what we're seeing in this moment that really threatens the work that we've done over decades is that there is a willingness to reduce the investment in some of the strategies that have been working for decades, alternatives to incarceration, supervised release. There are a number of strategies, mental health, housing, initiatives that we should be investing in. But at this moment, we're not seeing those kind of investments. And we need to check that. We need to have a conversation, and we need to encourage our political leaders and our government leaders to make the right investments. Because in a drop of a dime, we invest $500,000 to incarcerate one person on Rikers Island. $500,000. We have a Department of Correction workforce of 7,000 correction officers, total of 9,000 employees for a population of 6,000. We are making choices about what we invest in and what we hold on to versus what we invest in that could build a life, that can help transform someone's trajectory from a path of incarceration to one of stability. We're making choices about how we see our communities and whether we invest in our communities or we invest in the jailing of our communities and the over-policing of our communities and the incarceration of our young folks. Those are choices. And I challenge all of us to have those conversations and challenge our leaders to make the right investments.
And speaking of investments, right, like Archana, you've invested, right, as part of your leg of your career in being the lead and the president CEO of the Osborne Association. And so, like, what are your goals? Like, how do you hope to see Osborne increase its impact, right, in the work?
Yeah, I think, the really topical one is closing Rikers. Absolutely. But while Rikers is open, while people continue to be incarcerated, which, the closed Rikers plan includes community-based jails, there will continue to be people who are incarcerated. So we can't just say close Rikers and walk away, right? We have to say close Rikers and ensure people who are incarcerated are treated humanely and provided services that will help in their reentry and in the next phases of their lives. I think that's a big piece. I think there's another big piece around, mass incarceration. The result of it is that more and more people have experienced incarceration, have a criminal record, have then to navigate housing and jobs with this criminal background. So really creating pathways to success for formerly incarcerated people, and to really think about, it's not enough to just say like, okay, well, you can have a construction job, you can have this type of job, but sort of keep it narrow. I mean, if, a huge proportion of our populace has been incarcerated by policy choices around mass incarceration, we've got to do better. Like, we've got to have better pathways to success, because if people don't have careers as opposed to jobs, then how do we bring people out of poverty? How do we bring people out of the criminal legal system? I think the other big priority for Osborne that's coming up is thinking about, really what our identity is as an organization, how to put the voices of incarcerated people and formerly incarcerated people up front, how to tell their stories, how they can be the leaders in the conversations that we're having about incarceration. I think that they have the experience, they have the power, they should be at the table. And so we just have to bring that as a focal point to our work. And I think just, really to see an expanded impact. I mean, thankfully, we're seeing some really great leadership at the state level around investments in reentry and ATIs and pretrial diversion, and really pushing to see how we can capitalize on that investment and really bring the lessons we've learned in New York City and what's been successful to upstate regions.
No, totally. And, when we talk about investments, right, in people, right, there are specific populations that comprise those people. And I know, Jonathan, at Cases, you also work with younger people, right? And we have a few minutes left, so I'm gonna try to get this over quickly, but carefully, right? Because obviously your answers are so much relevant. And so, Jonathan, how can we better serve young people, right, who may have criminal legal system involvement? And like, what is one thing that makes you hopeful as the CEO of Cases?
Well, as a formerly incarcerated Black man who spent 16 years in prison, having an opportunity to lead an organization like Cases makes me hopeful. And working with people like Archana and Stanley, that makes me hopeful because there's tremendous talent and leadership and impetus to move the work forward. Some of the legislation around clean slate, I think that ties into the kind of things that needs to happen to make opportunities for people. But to get to your original question around the services for young people, it is really that upstream work. I mean, we really need to be focused on becoming organizations that are community based and provide community based services, and really not net widening, but net shrinking. We provide ATI services and all of those services on the back end in the middle, which are critically important. But, we want to have a city where we're averting people from even entering places like Rikers Island. We want to do everything we can to do all of the work that people who are poor, Black and brown, because that is who we ostensibly serve, are getting the things that they need so that they can live quality lives and that they are not living on the margins where if they make one mistake, their entire life is in the balance, which is the society that we live in now. And it's the things that we contend with. So I think the investments in programs like ACEs, and some of the programs that Fortune and Osborne are providing for young people and people in the community is what we need to be scaling up and investing our time and our effort in.
Thank you. We have about maybe 2 minutes left. So I'm going to go to you, Stan, right? Like what is Fortune doing, right, to support people impacted by the criminal legal system and their families and communities? And then turn it to Archana for the last point, right, about how, in terms of like some of the reentry housing and other important recent successes and challenges they've had. So we got about maybe 1 minute, 2 minutes.
I'll make this quick. We're working on two fronts. As Jonathan said, working further upstream, and that's about changing policy. So fair chance for housing, to eliminate discrimination for people with criminal records to access affordable housing. We are building out supportive and affordable housing in the community so that people have a place to go and live that they can afford. And we're supporting clean slate and other legislation that will reduce the perpetual barriers that people with criminal convictions have.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just love to take a second to talk about elder reentry and elder reentry into housing. That has been a focal point for us, and I know for Fortune as well. When you spend a good chunk of time in prison, you age more quickly than you do when you are not in prison. Food issues, other trauma, other issues cause an accelerated aging. So the age of a senior age is considered to be 50 when you've spent a good stretch of time in prison. So we've dedicated our housing efforts to older adults who are returning from prison. We have a great supportive housing facility in Brownsville, Brooklyn, and we have learned that dignity in housing really makes a huge difference in people's successful reentry.
Jonathan, Archana, Stanley, obviously it's never enough time, right? We can spend a significant amount of more time talking with each of you. We want to thank you for joining us here today on both sides of the bars. And we thank you, the listeners and observers and viewers, for joining us. We, in the meantime, want to make sure that on behalf of the Fortune Society, thanking you for tuning into both sides of the bars. And if you're interested in finding out more about the Fortune Society or the Osborne Association or cases, you can go to their websites. But for Fortune in particular, you can obviously check us out on the web at fortunesociety.org. That's fortunesociety.org, or on Facebook by typing in the Fortune Society. This is Andre Ward, and I appreciate all of you for viewing us for this episode as we critically look at both sides of the bars.